A small German Shepherd puppy, Rookie, was rejected from the military dog program for being too small and too slow. Left behind, he wandered near the base one night and discovered 10 armed drones ready to ambush a patrol. His warning saved an entire unit, and for the first time, Rookie earned a place among the soldiers. But the danger wasn't over. Those drones were only the beginning of a bigger plan to attack innocent families fleeing by river at dawn. Rookie joined the mission, using his sharp senses to uncover hidden bombs and protect civilians during a tense river ambush. With bullets flying and drones striking, Rookie leapt into danger, pulling down drones and shielding a terrified child. In the end, the pup once left behind stood tall with a guardian pup tag around his neck, proving that even the smallest can become a hero. Rookie was born on a foggy morning in a military canine training camp, where the sharp barks of shepherds echoed over hard-packed earth like a restless drumbeat. He was the smallest of his litter, his brown and black fur patchy over a thin back, legs too thin, paws too big, eyes bright but often downcast as the bigger pups shoved past him to reach the training yard. Every morning the air smelled of dew and dust, boots stomping in rhythm with paws padding over gravel. As the trainers barked commands that sliced through the dawn, the other puppies lunged toward the obstacles, climbing, jumping, biting at ropes with eager growls. Rookie would watch, ears perking up, trying to mimic them, his tail wagging in short, hopeful bursts. The first day they were tested on the high wall. Rookie stood in front of it, tilting his head. The wall loomed taller than the handlers, wooden planks rough, etched with claw marks from those who had made it over. One by one, his siblings leapt, claws scraping, tails swaying for balance, paws hitting the ground on the other side with soft thuds that meant triumph. Rookie ran forward, his paws thumping against the dirt, jumped and barely reached halfway before his body slid down, claws scratching, leaving lines that quickly faded into the dust. He tried again and again, the sun climbing higher as sweat beaded on the trainers' necks. The other puppies waited by the water trough, tongues lolling, tails wagging, while Rookie panted, chest heaving, eyes blinking against the sunlight, looking up at the wall as if it was an impossible mountain meant only for others. In scent drills, the other pups sniffed out hidden pouches of gun oil or cloth soaked in explosive residue, barking proudly when they found them, tails wagging as they returned to their handlers for praise. Rookie tried to follow the trails, nose pressed close to the ground, but he would get distracted by the smell of leaves, the scent of wet earth, the whisper of a passing breeze carrying something he couldn't quite identify. When he found the wrong pouch, the trainer's sigh felt heavier than the morning heat. "Not every pup is meant for the field," one handler muttered, scratching his chin, looking at Rookie with a tired softness in his eyes. Another trainer placed a hand on Rookie's small head, giving it a brief pat before turning away to log the results on a clipboard. Rookie stood there, feeling the warmth of the touch fade quickly, replaced by the cool shadow of being left behind. By the end of the week, a small tag was tied around Rookie's neck. "Does not meet standards." He was moved to a smaller kennel near the supply sheds, away from the barks of the training yard. At night, when the other pups were curled in their beds inside the barracks, Rookie pressed his nose against the wire fence, watching the lights of the base flicker under the moon, listening to the distant laughter of soldiers finishing their shifts, the hum of trucks, the faint calls of night birds along the tree line. He would close his eyes, imagining himself leaping over that wall, hearing the praise of the handlers, feeling the pride that the other pups wore so easily. Sometimes he would dream of running with them, the wind in his fur, paws thumping in unison with boots, feeling as if he belonged. But in the mornings, the handlers would walk past his kennel without stopping, their boots crunching on gravel, voices already focused on the day's drills. Rookie would whine softly, pressing his paws against the fence, tail wagging just in case someone might notice. The handlers would glance over with a mix of pity and practicality in their eyes before turning away. Yet even as days passed, Rookie did not lose the glint in his eyes when the breeze carried the scent of gun oil, the echo of distant barks, the low hum of an engine starting near the fence. Deep in his small chest, something stubborn and bright refused to be extinguished. A small spark that told him he could still matter, even if he did not know how yet. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, turning the sky into a burn of orange and purple, Rookie found the gate of his kennel slightly ajar. The scent of the outside air rushed and rich with the promise of dust, pine, oil, and something else, something urgent that made the fur on his back stand up. His ears perked, heart thudding. He nudged the gate with his nose, and it opened just enough for him to slip through. For a moment, Rookie stood there, paws on the cool dirt, the camp laid out in front of him, lights blinking like small stars against the falling night. And without looking back, Rookie began to walk toward the edge of the training grounds, into the dusk, where a destiny far bigger than himself was waiting. Rookie's paws pressed into the soft dirt as he moved under the hush of twilight, his small frame weaving between crates and coiled wires stacked along the back of the training grounds. Every few steps he paused, lifting his nose to catch the scents carried by the warm evening breeze, fuel, iron, pine needles crushed under boots, the metallic tang of old blood from the training dummies. His ears twitched with the distant echoes of soldiers calling out to each other, trucks rumbling toward the gates, a radio crackling near the guard post. The world beyond the kennel fence felt impossibly large, humming with life and tension Rookie could not name but felt in every hair along his back. It made him both nervous and alive, the low thump of his heart, like a drum reminding him he was free at least for now. Past the edge of the training yard lay a stretch of gravel leading to the outer perimeter of the base, a narrow path bordered by sparse trees and floodlights that blinked on as darkness deepened. Rookie trotted along the path, occasionally glancing over his shoulder, expecting a voice to call him back, a whistle from a handler to order him into submission. But no one came. The soldiers he passed didn't notice him, their eyes fixed on their duties, weighed down by the responsibility of guarding the perimeter. Rookie watched them as they adjusted scopes on their rifles, checked radios, or leaned against crates, smoking quietly. Their boots made small clouds of dust with every step, and Rookie's paws stepped in their footprints, trying to match the rhythm as if he, too, was part of their patrol. The further he went, the cooler the air became, carrying the scent of the nearby forest mixed with something faint and electric, like metal burning in the air. Rookie paused near a stack of empty barrels, his ears lifting, nostrils flaring as he tried to catch the strange scent. It was coming from the direction of the old fence that bordered the base, a fence lined with barbed wire and rusted in places. Beyond it lay a thin strip of forest, and then the darkness of unclaimed hills. Rookie's paws moved without thought, driven by the instinct that had made him bark at shifting winds, sniff at empty crates, and press against fences waiting for something only he could sense. He squeezed under a gap in the fence, the barbed wire grazing his back, leaving a thin line of pain that flared and then settled into a warm sting. The forest on the other side was alive with the chirping of insects and the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. The moon had begun to rise, pale and solemn, lighting the path in silver streaks that shifted with every breeze. Rookie's paws made almost no sound on the forest floor as he crept forward, eyes darting to shadows, ears turning like small radars to every sound. He was afraid, but the fear felt right, like the kind that told him he was where he needed to be, doing what he needed to do. Then he saw it. A soft red light flickered in the branches above him, moving slowly, stopping, moving again. Rookie squinted, focusing on the glow until shapes took form against the darkness, small mechanical limbs, blinking lights, a thin hum that vibrated in the air like a whisper. A drone. Ma. And then another, and another until Rookie counted 10 of them, hovering near the treetops, moving in a formation that made no sense to him. But in his bones, he knew it was wrong. They shifted closer toward the edge of the forest, toward the base, their lights flickering like tiny, waiting eyes. Rookie's breath caught in his throat, his ears flattening back as instinct screamed at him to run, to hide, to let the night swallow him up and leave the world to its troubles. But he didn't. His paws moved, first in small steps, then faster, until he was running back the way he came, crashing through underbrush, ignoring the branches that scraped against his sides. The smell of the drones clung to his nose, sharp and cold, and he let it guide him, let it drive him forward. He burst back through the gap in the fence, tumbling onto the gravel, scrambling to his feet. The red lights had moved closer now, hovering near the tree-line, barely visible to human eyes but clear to Rookie's sharp vision. He ran toward the guard post, barking loud, a sharp, desperate sound that cut through the night like a siren. The soldiers turned, startled, their hands moving to rifles, eyes sweeping for threats they couldn't yet see. Rookie barked again, circling, pointing with his nose, pawing at the air, dragging their eyes toward the treeling where the drones glowed faintly. His small body vibrated with urgency, the instinct of a shepherd flaring to life in the knowledge that danger was near, and he was the only one who could warn them. For a moment, no one moved. Then a soldier lifted his binoculars, peering into the darkness. A low curse escaped his lips. "Drones," he whispered, loud enough for the others to hear. And suddenly the guard post exploded into action, radios crackling, boots slamming against gravel, orders shouted into the night. Rookie stepped back, breathing hard, eyes fixed on the drones that now shifted, adjusting, ready to strike. And in that moment, under the floodlights and the rising chaos, Rookie realized he was no longer just a rejected pup from a training yard. He was needed. The night was no longer quiet. Once the soldiers' whispered drones broke the hush, the entire base shifted into a tension that pulsed through the gravel and the steel of the gates. Flashlights swept over the trees, radios crackled with urgent voices, boots pounded across the ground as soldiers rushed to their posts. Orders were shouted, clipped and sharp, slicing through the air like cold blades. Rookie stood at the edge of the guard post, paws braced, chest heaving. His eyes remained fixed on the red dots moving slowly near the treetops, weaving patterns in the dark sky like silent predators. His ears flicked at every sound, the click of rifles being loaded, the whir of a searchlight being tilted up, the distant whine of engines. 10 drones. They hovered, advanced, paused, as if calculating the timing of their strike. Rookie didn't know about military tactics, didn't understand the weight of the uniforms or the maps spread across tables inside the command tents, but he could smell danger, a mix of scorched metal and the electric tang of hidden violence. "Whose dog is that?" one soldier shouted as he passed, but no one answered. Rookie was no one's dog now, but tonight he was everyone's. The commanding officer, a tall woman with tired eyes, lowered her night vision binoculars, her jaw tightening. "Get the jammers ready. Lock the gates. If those drones cross the perimeter, they'll go for the patrol unit." Rookie's ears twitched. Patrol unit. Through the chaos, he understood enough to know there were soldiers outside, returning from a perimeter sweep, unaware that 10 drones, armed and waiting, hovered in the dark, ready to strike. A technician struggled with the signal jammer, pulling cables, pressing buttons as the device whined to life. Rookie barked sharply, pointing his nose toward the tree lane again, pacing in tight circles to keep the soldiers' eyes on the drones. The red lights flickered, then began to descend. A low hum filled the air, like a swarm of bees hidden in the blackness, growing louder, closer. One by one, the drones dipped beneath the treetops, almost disappearing, blinking faintly as they hovered over the tall grass, moving toward the road where the returning patrol was due to pass. "Now," the officer shouted. The technician pressed the activation button. The jammer released a low, pulsing wave that hummed across the base, rattling the metal fences, buzzing in Rookie's ears. He flinched, shaking his head, but kept his eyes on the sky. The drones began to wobble. Their perfect, silent dance turned chaotic. One spun in a sudden circle. Another dipped and crashed into the dirt with a puff of dust. 2 more collided in midair with a sharp crack that echoed across the field, sending shards of plastic and metal into the grass. The soldiers cheered, a brief, desperate relief cutting through the fear, but Rookie didn't relax. His nose twitched as he tracked the burning scent of the drones falling, the acrid smoke that came with snapped circuits and leaking batteries. But 2 of them kept coming, jerking and stumbling in the air like injured birds, their lights still blinking, weapons armed. Rookie didn't wait. He bolted from the guard post, paws drumming against the gravel, claws scraping as he turned sharply toward the road. Shouts rose behind him. A soldier tried to grab him, but his small body slipped through their hands, legs pumping as he followed the scent of oil and burning wires. The road ahead was empty, the night heavy with tension. Rookie could hear the hum of the patrol's vehicle, a soft growl of an engine in the distance, approaching steadily, unaware of the drones closing in. The two drones dipped lower, skimming over the treetops, preparing for their strike. Rookie barked a high, sharp sound that cut through the night, sprinting down the road toward the patrol. His paws burned against the rough surface, but he didn't stop, barking again and again, leaping into the beam of the headlights as the patrol truck rounded the bend. The truck screeched to a halt, tires screaming, doors flying open as soldiers jumped out, weapons raised, eyes scanning for threats. And there above them the two drones buzzed, lowering, weapons glinting in the moonlight. One soldier shouted, lifting his rifle, but the drone shifted suddenly, locking on. Rookie didn't think, didn't pause. He launched himself forward, barking and leaping, his jaws snapping as he lunged at the nearest drone just as it dipped within reach. His teeth closed around a spinning propeller, the blade slicing into his gums, pain blooming like fire in his mouth. But he held on, shaking his head, dragging the drone down, its lights flashing wildly as it crashed onto the road with a crunch, sparks flying. The second drone, thrown off course, spun toward the trees, losing signal, and collided into a trunk with a heavy thud, dropping to the ground in a small burst of smoke. Silence fell. Rookie staggered back, blood dripping from his mouth, the taste of metal bitter on his tongue. The soldiers stood frozen for a moment, staring at the small shepherd who panted heavily, eyes still locked on the downed drones. Then one of them dropped to a knee, reaching out with a trembling hand. "Good dog," he whispered. Rookie's tail wagged once, slow and tired, as his legs trembled beneath him. And in that quiet moment, under the moonlight and the smell of smoke, Rookie stood among the soldiers, no longer a dog who had failed, but a guardian who had found his purpose. The patrol soldiers surrounded Rookie as the smoke from the downed drones curled into the cool night air, the scent of burned wires and hot plastic sharp under the moonlight. One soldier, still kneeling, carefully touched Rookie's muzzle, where thin lines of blood stained the fur. "You did good, little guy," the soldier murmured. Rookie blinked, his breath heavy, tongue lolling as the adrenaline coursed through him. His eyes never left the wreckage of the drones, their blinking lights now reduced to dull flashes, their propellers snapped and sparking in the dirt. A truck rumbled in, lights sweeping across the scene, casting long shadows of soldiers and the small dog who had saved them. Officers stepped down, weapons ready, eyes scanning the tree line for more threats. But the forest had returned to silence, broken only by the soft chirps of night insects and the occasional crackle of a fallen branch. "Secure the area," the commanding officer barked. Her eyes fell on Rookie, and for a moment, the hardness in them softened. "And someone get a med kit for that dog." As soldiers moved to collect the drone remains, removing memory cards, camera units, and what small explosives had been attached, Rookie sat, licking the blood from his lips. Every sound, every movement was sharp in his mind, the echo of propellers still buzzing in his ears. His eyes flicked to the road, watching as the patrol soldiers loaded their rifles, checking the shadows, alert now because of him. That was when a technician jogged over, clutching the drone cameras, his face pale under the lights. "Mom, you need to see this." The officer took the camera module, watching the shaky footage, the red glow of infrared picking up the shapes of soldiers, the road, and then cutting to another feed, a small convoy of civilians, a truck carrying crates, a boat near the river's edge. Her brow furrowed. "What is this?" "They weren't just targeting the patrol," the technician whispered. "They were scouting for a bigger hit, a civilian convoy. This footage is from just a few hours ago, and they were mapping the rapid near the river. That boat is carrying refugees and families evacuating the border villages." The weight of the moment pressed down on the camp like the thick darkness of the forest. Rookie shifted on his paws, sensing the tension, his ears twitching as he tried to read the energy of the humans around him. "We could have lost them all," the officer muttered, looking down at Rookie. "If it weren't for you." Rookie tilted his head, watching her eyes, feeling the sincerity behind the calm control of her voice. He didn't understand her words, but he knew the warmth in her gaze meant something was changing. A soldier brought over a small bowl of water, setting it gently in front of Rookie. He sniffed it, then drank, the water washing away the taste of blood and smoke, cooling the fire in his throat. Behind him, the technician continued. We need to check the data, but it looks like this was a prelude. Those drones were just the eyes. They were prepping for something bigger, something that would hit the civilians near the river at dawn. Silence followed, heavy and sharp. The officer turned, barking orders. We mobilize at first light. We secure that convoy and we find who sent those drones. As the soldiers moved to prepare, loading supplies, checking weapons, and prepping communication lines, Ruki stood and padded closer to the officer, who knelt down to his level, looking into his amber eyes. You're coming with us, she said softly, clipping a small makeshift tag on his collar with trembling fingers. You earned your place. Ruki's tail thumped once, twice, as he looked around. For the first time, the base felt different. The lights no longer looked cold. The footsteps around him no longer distant. He was no longer the puppy pressed against the kennel fence, wishing for a chance. He had found it, in the dark, in the fear, in the fire of the moment. The officer stood, turning back to her team, barking orders, but she left her hand resting on Ruki's head for just a moment longer, grounding herself before the coming storm. Later that night, Ruki lay curled under a tarp near the command post, listening to the soft hum of radios, the low voices of soldiers planning for dawn, the rattle of weapons being cleaned and prepared. He felt the vibrations of footsteps moving around him, the camp alive with purpose, and for once, he felt like he was part of it. As he drifted into an exhausted sleep, Ruki dreamed of the river, the boat, the families who would need protection. He didn't understand the complexity of war, of strategy, of what was coming, but in his heart he knew one thing. He would not let the danger reach them. He would stand, small but fierce, and do what he was born to do. He would guard. The dawn arrived quietly, a thin line of pale orange pushing back the darkness above the trees. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of dew and gasoline as trucks lined up at the edge of the camp, engines idling in low rumbles, ready to move at a moment's notice. Ruki stood near the command tent, his small body still, ears perked, eyes watching as soldiers moved like shadows, checking weapons, reloading ammunition, strapping on vests and radios. The weight of what lay ahead crackled in the air, a quiet tension that made even the birds fall silent for a moment. Beside him, the commanding officer clipped a small, silver tag onto Ruki's collar. It was a simple piece of metal, stamped hastily with the letters Guardian Pup Honorary. The tag jingled softly, and Ruki lowered his nose to sniff it, his tail giving a hesitant wag. You've earned this, the officer said, her voice low as she looked into his amber eyes. She wasn't smiling, but her eyes were warm, steady. Today you're one of us. Ruki didn't understand medals, or ranks, or honor, but he felt something deep in his chest, a warmth, a belonging he had yearned for since the day he had watched the other dogs leave for training, while he stayed behind the fence. A soldier approached with a small bandage kit, kneeling to wrap the cuts on Ruki's paws from the night before. The young man's hands were gentle, and his smile was shy as he whispered, "Good job, buddy," before giving Ruki a small piece of jerky from his pocket. Ruki chewed the jerky slowly, his eyes drifting to the trucks being loaded with crates of water, medical supplies, and heavy packs. Soldiers moved with purpose, but there was fear in their eyes, too, a knowledge of what might happen on the road ahead. Near the edge of the camp, a team of technicians huddled around the broken drones, pulling data from their memory cards, tracing signals, piecing together the movements of the enemy. A map was unrolled on the hood of a truck, lines drawn in red, marking the river where the civilian convoy would be passing that morning. A convoy of families, children, mothers, fathers, all trying to escape the border villages before the conflict swallowed them whole. The officer stood, her boots crunching on the gravel as she addressed her team. We have confirmation that the drones were mapping the river route for an ambush. We believe there's a cell waiting to strike the convoy before it reaches the checkpoint. We will intercept, clear the path, and protect those civilians. She paused, eyes scanning her soldiers before falling to Ruki, who sat at her heel, tail resting on the ground, eyes locked on her face. And this little one here, she said, her voice steadying, saved an entire patrol last night. We're here because of him. Let's make sure we finish what he started. A murmur of agreement moved through the soldiers, their eyes flicking to Ruki, some nodding, others giving him a small smile before turning to their gear. Rookie lifted his chin, feeling the energy around him, the tension blending with determination. The trucks rumbled to life, headlights cutting through the soft dawn fog as the convoy formed. Rookie was lifted carefully by the young soldier who had bandaged him, setting him gently in the front seat of the lead truck. The soldier scratched behind his ears, and Rookie pressed his head into the touch for a brief moment, feeling safe, ready. As the trucks rolled forward, gravel crunching under heavy tires, Rookie stuck his nose out of the window, letting the morning air wash over him. The scent of Pine River water and gasoline filled his senses, but underneath it, faint, was that sharp, electric scent of metal and oil, the scent of drones, of the machines that had almost brought destruction. Rookie's ears twitched, and his eyes sharpened. He would remember that scent, would know it anywhere, and he would not let it near the innocent again. The convoy left the camp behind, moving along the dirt roads, past rows of trees, where the sunlight filtered through in shifting patches, the sky above brightening into a soft blue. Birds began to call again, their voices clear in the morning stillness, unaware of the weight that the soldiers carried on this road. Rookie shifted, settling against the soldier's leg, feeling the vibration of the truck as it moved. Ahead, the road curved toward the river, where the civilian boats would soon appear, unaware of the threat waiting in the shadows. As the trucks approached the river crossing, the officer's voice crackled over the radio, clear and strong. "Eyes up, we protect them, no matter what." Rookie's tail thumped once against the seat. His eyes were locked on the road, his ears tuned to every sound, ready for the moment when he would need to leap into action again. Because now he was no longer a pup who didn't measure up. He was Guardian Pup, and he was exactly where he needed to be. The morning light grew stronger as the trucks rumbled toward the river, their engines blending with the soft rustling of leaves along the roadside. The soldiers sat in steady silence, checking their weapons and radios, eyes sharp as the world outside turned golden under the rising sun. Rookie pressed his paws against the edge of the window, his nose twitching as he caught the scents rolling in from the forest and the water ahead. They reached a bend in the road where the trees opened to reveal the wide river, its surface catching the morning light like scattered shards of glass. A few boats drifted slowly near the bank, men and women moving carefully as they loaded crates onto the wooden decks. Children huddled close to their mothers, their eyes large and uncertain, clutching bags and small bundles wrapped in cloth. Rookie's gaze swept over the scene, taking in every movement, every sound, every scent the breeze carried. Underneath the smell of river water and pine, there it was again, that sharp electric scent of metal and oil, faint but clear, brushing the edge of his senses like a warning whisper. The commanding officer stepped out of the lead truck, her boots sinking into the soft earth as she surveyed the area. Soldiers fanned out along the riverbank, moving with quiet urgency as they checked the undergrowth and the crates stacked along the shore. The radio crackled with updates as scouts moved ahead, their voices low but tense. Rookie jumped from the truck, landing softly on the ground, his paws pressing into the damp grass. His ears flicked back and forth as he moved toward the water, weaving between crates and legs, nose close to the ground as he followed the trail only he could sense. Near a stack of barrels by the edge of the water, Rookie stopped, his body tense, his nose hovering just above a thin line of disturbed earth. He sniffed again, the scent stronger here, layered with the cold hint of explosives buried just beneath the dirt. He barked sharply, a single sound that snapped the soldiers' attention toward him. One of them rushed over, dropping to his knees beside Rookie, carefully brushing aside the dirt. There, under a thin layer of earth, wires snaked toward a small metal box, the light on its surface blinking slowly in the shadows. The soldier's breath caught as he leaned back, his eyes wide. He called out for the officer, and soon a small circle of soldiers formed around the hidden device, their faces pale in the morning light. Rookie stepped back, his eyes locked on the blinking light, his ears pinned as the tension around him thickened. They found another device near the boats, hidden beneath a loose plank on the dock. Another was strapped beneath a crate meant for the civilians' supplies. Each one was wired to detonate by remote, a quiet promise of destruction waiting in the hands of those hiding in the forest beyond. The officer's voice was calm but firm as she ordered the area cleared, her eyes sharp as she scanned the tree lane, searching for the shadows that watched them. The civilians were ushered back toward the trucks, mothers holding their children close as they moved quickly, fear and confusion written across their faces. Ruki stayed close to the officer, his body low, eyes scanning the shadows as he listened for the sounds that did not belong. The chirp of a bird, the rustle of leaves, the faint crack of a twig under a boot not meant to be there. Then he saw it. A flicker of movement behind a fallen tree, the glint of metal catching the light as a figure shifted, holding a device with an antenna pointed toward the river. Ruki's body tensed as he barked, loud and sharp, breaking the momentary silence that had fallen over the scene. The soldiers turned, weapons raised, eyes following Ruki's pointed gaze. A single shot cracked through the air, and the figure behind the tree dropped, the remote detonator clattering to the ground beside him. A sharp command echoed, and soldiers moved swiftly into the forest, fanning out as they secured the perimeter, dragging 2 more figures from the undergrowth, their faces masked, eyes hard and empty. Ruki stood by the water, watching as the soldiers disarmed the explosives, cutting wires with careful hands, sweat shining on their foreheads despite the cool morning air. Each device was placed gently into a crate filled with sand, the blinking lights finally darkening as the threat was neutralized. The officer knelt beside Ruki, her hand resting gently on his head as she exhaled, her eyes closing for a moment before meeting his steady gaze. "Good job," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the breeze that swept across the water. Ruki's tail wagged once, his eyes bright, his body relaxing as the fear in the air shifted into relief. Around them, the civilians slowly returned, the mothers holding their children a little closer, the fathers helping load crates onto the boats with cautious hope in their eyes. As the sun climbed higher, lighting the river in warm gold, Ruki sat quietly by the water's edge, watching the world breathe again, the danger passing like a shadow lifting from the morning. He did not understand the words or the plans, but he understood the smiles, the soft touches on his head, the quiet thanks in the eyes of those he had helped protect. And in that moment, with the river calm and the forest quiet, Ruki knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The boats pushed away from the riverbank under the soft glow of morning light, the water rippling around them as they drifted into the current. Mothers held their children close, fathers kept their eyes on the shoreline, scanning for any sign of movement, their hands resting on the crates that held what little they could carry from their homes. Soldiers walked along the narrow docks, eyes sharp, weapons ready, their radios crackling with updates from the patrols sweeping the tree line. The air smelled of wet wood and river mud, mixed with the faint metallic scent of spent ammunition and cold oil from the engines of the patrol boats. Ruki stood at the edge of the dock, paws planted firmly, ears twitching as he listened to the forest beyond. Every rustle, every bird call, every shift in the breeze was noted, his body tense and ready. He turned his head toward the officer who stood nearby, her eyes on the convoy of boats as they moved slowly into the open water. The officer glanced down at Ruki, giving a small nod, her hand resting briefly on his back before she lifted her radio to her lips, speaking softly but firmly. "Stay sharp, everyone. We're not clear yet." A low hum began to rise from the river, the engines of the patrol boats moving into position alongside the civilian vessels. The soldiers on the boats scanned the trees, fingers on triggers, eyes narrowed against the glare of the rising sun on the water. Ruki's nose twitched. The sharp scent of metal and oil was back, stronger now, carried on the breeze that swept across the river. He moved along the dock, barking once, then twice, his body pulling toward the edge as he stared at a bend in the river, where the trees pressed close to the water. The officer turned, following his gaze just as the first shot cracked through the air. Kaws erupted as bullets hit the water, sending small splashes into the air. The soldiers on the boats returned fire, their rifles barking in sharp, controlled bursts as they scanned the shoreline for the hidden attackers. Civilians ducked low, clutching their children, pressing themselves against the crates for cover as the boats rocked gently in the water. Ruki barked again, louder this time, as he sprinted down the dock, his paws thudding against the wooden planks. He leaped onto the nearest patrol boat just as it pulled away, landing lightly before moving to the bow. His eyes locked on the shoreline. From the trees, flashes of muzzle fire lit the shadows as figures moved between the trunks, using the undergrowth as cover. One of the attackers lifted a small device, aiming it toward the boats, and Ruki's body tensed, recognizing the glint of metal, the sharp smell that had haunted him since the night of the drones. The attacker pressed the trigger, and a small drone launched from the shadows, its propellers whining as it lifted into the air, moving swiftly toward the boats with a blinking red light on its underside. Ruki barked, a deep, sharp sound that cut through the chaos, drawing the eyes of the soldiers on the boat. One of them saw the drone just in time, lifting his rifle and firing, the shot striking the drone's body, sending it spiraling into the water with a hiss of steam and a small pop as its circuits shorted out. But another drone launched from the trees, followed by a third, weaving through the air as they moved toward the convoy. Ruki's eyes tracked them, his body shifting as he prepared to leap if needed, every muscle ready, every breath steady. A child on one of the boats screamed as a drone dipped low, moving toward the deck where the families huddled. Ruki launched himself from the patrol boat, landing on the civilian boat with a thud that shook the planks. He sprinted toward the drone, barking loudly, drawing its sensors toward him as it adjusted its flight path. The drone hovered for a moment, its red light blinking, before dropping lower, its small arms shifting as it prepared to release the device it carried. Ruki lunged, his jaws snapping around one of the drone's propellers, the blades slicing against his muzzle as he shook his head violently. The drone wobbled, its sensors flashing in confusion, before crashing onto the deck with a sharp crack, sparks flying as it bounced once, then fell into the river with a splash, sinking beneath the surface. Ruki stepped back, blood dripping from a small cut on his muzzle, his breath heavy, eyes still locked on the tree line. The child who had screamed looked at him with wide eyes, tears streaking down a dusty face before reaching out a small hand, touching the fur on Ruki's shoulder. "Thank you," the child whispered, voice shaking, barely heard over the sound of the river and the fading gunfire. Soldiers continued to fire, pushing back the attackers along the shoreline. The last of the drones were shot down, crashing into the water or onto the muddy banks where they sparked and smoked. Slowly, the gunfire faded, replaced by the quiet sounds of the river and the soft sobs of relieved families as they realized the danger was passing. Ruki stood quietly on the deck, the child's hand still resting against his fur, the warm light of the morning sun washing over them both as the boats continued down the river toward safety. In that moment, with the scent of smoke drifting away on the breeze and the river carrying them forward, Ruki knew that he had done what he was meant to do. He had protected. The river was calm now, its surface catching the light of the rising sun as the boats drifted steadily downstream. The chaos of gunfire and falling drones had passed, leaving only the soft sound of water lapping against wooden hulls and the quiet breathing of families who held each other close. Ruki stood on the deck of the civilian boat, his paws steady, his eyes scanning the tree line as it slowly pulled away. The scent of smoke still lingered in the breeze, but it was fading, replaced by the softer scents of river mud, damp wood, and the faint sweetness of crushed leaves along the bank. The child who had touched Ruki's fur still sat beside him, her small hand resting gently on his back as she looked out over the water. Her eyes were tired but clear, reflecting the light of the dawn. She did not speak, but every now and then, she would glance at Ruki, and a small, grateful smile would cross her face before she turned back to the river. On the patrol boats moving alongside, soldiers checked their radios and weapons, but their movements had lost the sharpness of fear, replaced by the quiet calm that came when a fight was over and life had been protected. Some of the soldiers looked toward Ruki, nodding when they met his gaze, their eyes softening, their shoulders lowering as they breathed out the tension that had gripped them since before the sun had risen. The commanding officer stood near the edge of her boat, her eyes on the convoy as it moved forward, watching the civilians who had been saved, the children who had been spared, the families who still held each other in the soft light of morning. She lifted her radio, her voice clear as it moved across the channel. "Good work, everyone. We're bringing them home." Ruki's ears twitched as he listened to her voice, and he lifted his head, breathing in the fresh air, letting it fill his chest. He did not understand all the words, but he felt the peace in them, the quiet pride that came when something right had been done. As the boats reached the wider part of the river, where the current slowed and the banks opened to fields of tall grass, the civilians began to stand, stretching tired limbs, whispering quiet prayers of thanks, helping each other gather bags and crates. The child beside Ruki stood as well, her small hand brushing over his fur one last time before she stepped carefully toward her mother, who lifted her into her arms, holding her close with tears in her eyes. Ruki watched them, his tail wagging once, a slow, content sweep that matched the rhythm of the river. The mother looked back at him, her lips moving in a soft thank you, her eyes filled with gratitude and relief that words could not fully hold. The officer's boat pulled alongside, and she stepped across the narrow gap to join Ruki on the deck. She knelt beside him, her hand resting on his head, her eyes warm as she looked into his amber gaze. "You saved lives today," she said softly, her fingers scratching behind his ears. "You did what many could not." Ruki leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a moment as he let the warmth of the sun and the kindness in her voice wash over him. In that moment, the memory of the kennel fence and the feeling of being too small, too slow, too unworthy faded, replaced by the steady certainty that he had found his place. A soldier stepped forward, holding a small cloth pouch, and handed it to the officer. She opened it, pulling out a narrow strip of green fabric, a small tag attached to it, stamped with the words "Guardian Pup" in clear, strong letters. She tied it gently around Ruki's neck, adjusting it so it sat just above his collar, the tag glinting in the morning light. "There," she whispered, her eyes bright with pride. "Now everyone will know who you are." Ruki lifted his head, the tag catching the sun as he turned to look at the families waving from the boats, the children pointing and smiling, the soldiers nodding in respect as they prepared to guide the convoy safely to the docks ahead. The river carried them forward, the breeze cool and fresh, the world waking around them as birds began to sing from the treetops. Ruki stood tall, his ears lifted, his eyes watching the horizon, the warmth in his chest steady and strong. He had once been the pup left behind, too small, too weak to keep up with the others. But now, with the tag around his neck and the memory of the lives he had protected, he was something more. He was Guardian Pup. And as the boats drifted into the light of the new day, Ruki knew this was only the beginning. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end of this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more stories like this, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss the next ones we share. Your support truly helps keep these stories alive. We would also love to hear your thoughts and feelings about Ruki's journey, so please share your opinions in the comments below. It means a lot to see what these stories mean to you. Thank you again for being here.